Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeek.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? This is the 2019 rookie recap and the 2020 rookie preview. We will be looking at the rookie class of wide receivers and running backs from 2019 and the same for the upcoming 2020 rookies. If you've been listening to the podcast for the past couple of weeks, we just did about 2 or 3 weeks on the draft. So probably hear a lot of stuff about these rookies that you might have already heard, but we're going to go through it anyway. So starting off with the wide receivers, we're going to look at the wide receivers from last year and the top dog, who was A.J. Brown. He had the highest finish among the 2019 class, just outside of the top 20. He was 21 overall. Thanks to his 9 touchdowns and his 1,000-plus yards, both tops amongst rookies. Brown might be in the best position of this class because the team did not draft or sign a single wide receiver this offseason, and their former number 5 overall pick, Corey Davis, is now playing on the last year of his deal. The Titans declined his 5th-year option, so if you look at this offense, A.J. Brown has really nobody to compete with for targets besides, like I just mentioned, Corey Davis and a slot receiver, Adam Humphries, tight end, Jonnu Smith, and the rookie running back that they brought in, Darrington Evans. So I really like A.J. Brown this year. Going to the next guy, Deebo Samuels, the first wide receiver selected on day 2 of the 2019 draft. Deebo had a great rookie year. He played on one of the most run-heavy offenses in the league, but still put up really good numbers. 47 catches on 81 targets for about 800 yards. He had 6 touchdowns, good for about 12.5 points per game. He finished as the number 31 wide receiver in half PPR. Played in 15 games. He was good. Although the 49ers let Manuel Sanders leave in free agency and they traded away Marquise Goodwin in the middle of the draft, Deebo's got some new competition for targets in rookie wide receiver Brandon Ayuk. I still have faith in Kyle Shanahan to get Deebo involved enough to be a solid flex player, wide receiver number 2. He should be second on the team in targets behind only their big-time tight end, their George Kittle. The next rookie from last year, DK Metcalf, the only 2019 rookie wide receiver with 100 targets. DK could be a monster this year. Russell Wilson has been public in wanting the offense to throw the ball a little bit more, and to me, DK would be the guy most likely to see the majority of that increase in targets. He fits the mold as a target funnel wide receiver with the size and the speed to pretty much run any route. The Seahawks did sign Philip Dorsett, but I'm excited about DK this year. Fantasy Pros has him actually as wide receiver number 23 right now, so I think he finishes in the top 20 easy. The next big guy, Marquise Hollywood Brown. Marquise Brown was towards the bottom of the list in all of the receiving stats among rookies last year, and he now has 2 other speedsters to compete with for targets in Devin Duvernay.
All right.
And James Prochet. I also think Mark Andrews is still the lead target there on the team, but I think Duvernay could do some pretty special stuff there. Terry McLaurin, the next guy, finished with the highest points per game amongst the rookies last year, and he was in by far the worst situation. He's now got 3 rookie wide receivers coming in, although only one of them was drafted, Antonio Gandy Golden in the 4th round. The Redskins also have about 10 running backs on their roster, so I think they're going to really just run the hell out of the ball. McLaurin will be their top target, but I just don't know what that's really going to amount to with the QB position being what it is in Washington. This next group of rookie wide receivers from last year were all guys that either got hurt or they missed a lot of time, or they just simply did not perform all that well. So starting with Preston Williams with the Dolphins. He played the first half of the season and was on pace for a pretty solid year, but he tore his ACL. The only pass catcher on the Dolphins drafted was Malcolm Perry from Navy. So it looks like it's going to be him along with Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki as like the top 3 targets down there in Miami. If he can return and be healthy and he can stay healthy, he's another candidate for a late round sleeper. Like I said, he was on pace to do some pretty good stuff as a rookie. The next guy staying in the AFC East is N'Keal Harry. He missed the first 9 games of the season with a hamstring injury, and he never saw more than 4 targets until week 17. He totaled 105 yards in 7 games. And he did have 2 touchdowns, but did not live up to the expectations of a first-round pick. Playing with Tom Brady especially, he'll have a chance this year with Julian Edelman as the only other real threat to his workload. And with the Patriots completely ignoring wide receiver in the draft, and Damian Byrd, the only wide receiver they added in free agency, N'Keal Harry should be the top dog there, at least on the outside. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, probably the biggest bust of the 2019 rookie wide receivers. He played in 8 games, and despite Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey missing the majority of the season, Whiteside was only able to put up 169 yards on 10 catches. From week 11 to week 16, when the Eagles were absolutely decimated by injuries on offense, Whiteside averaged only 2.5 targets. So he was by far the biggest bust among wide receivers. The next guy is Paris Campbell. The Andrew Luck retirement definitely put a hamper on Campbell's rookie year. He also had some injuries throughout the season, but he should benefit from now having Phillip Rivers throwing him the ball. The Colts did add 2 wide receivers in the draft, one of them with their first pick, Michael Pittman. They also traded for Trey Burton after allowing Eric Ebron to go to Pittsburgh in free agency. So this offense should be all around a lot better. Campbell didn't really have a defined role last year, but I would assume he ends up playing the majority of the time in the slot with Pittman and T.Y. out wide. And the last guys here, Andy Isabella and Akeem Butler, both from the Arizona Cardinals. Isabella returned 5 kicks and had 3 rushing attempts, only caught 9 of 13 targets last year despite playing in every single game. He did have an 88-yard touchdown catch in Week 8, so we did get to see that elite speed that got him drafted in the second round 2 years ago. Akeem Butler, however, did not play a single snap, and he spent almost the entire year on IR. The Cardinals' passing game will most likely be dominated by Larry Fitzgerald in the slot and Christian Kirk on one side with DeAndre Hopkins on the other. But it's going to be very interesting to see if either of these guys can take the next step and earn that 4th wide receiver spot. If I had to pick one, it would be Isabella because of that speed and the fact that we've actually seen him do it. Akeem Butler has some serious speed for a 6'5", 227-pound guy. He's got a huge catch radius, so either guy could easily win that deep threat burner role for Arizona. And I just realized I went right from page 1 to page 3, and I forgot about page 2 of my notes. So this next set of 4 guys are kind of the second tier, the middle tier of these 2019 rookie wide receivers, starting with Mecole Hardman. He had the highest yards per reception among the top 9 wide receivers from last year, but he had the lowest target share on his team with only 7%. He was behind Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, obviously, but also behind Sammy Watkins and Demarcus Robinson. The running back position had 26% of the targets, which you got to figure is only going to go up with Clyde Edwards-Helaire being there now. I think Hardman will see more work this year, but I think his ceiling is kind of 5th most targets on the team, and most likely is probably 6th on the team. Being the best offense in football is very appealing, but I think I'm going to let somebody else draft this kid in my seasonal leagues. Hunter Renfrow. Renfrow had the fewest touchdowns, and he played in the fewest games among the 2019 rookie wide receivers with over 40 targets. He's also the guy I'm worried about the most in this group. The Raiders drafted 3 more wide receivers, one of them being the super versatile Lynn Bowden. They signed Nelson Aguilar and star XFL receiver DeMornay Pearson-L, who both will be directly competing for that slot position. Plus, the Raiders have 7 tight ends on their roster as of right now. So that's including the standout Darren Waller, who pretty much ran the majority of his routes in the slot last year as well. So they also went out and signed Jason Witten and Nick O'Leary. So that's a lot of dudes competing for those middle-of-the-field targets, which is why I'm worried about Hunter Renfrow. Next is Darius Slayton. He had somewhat of a slow start to his rookie year, but he finished as the number 37 wide receiver in half PPR. Darius Slayton had 48 catches on 83 targets. Not the greatest catch percentage, but he did have 740 yards, 8 touchdowns, good for about 12 points a game. He only played in 14 of the games, though. So he had 3 games with multiple touchdowns, including his 15-target, 10-catch, 121-yard game against the Jets. He'll probably be competing with Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, and a fleet of tight ends for targets. But I think Slayton emerges as the top wide receiver there by the end of the 2020 season. Then, last but not least, Deontay Johnson. He's an interesting guy because he actually led the Steelers in target share, catches, and touchdowns, despite Juju being there. He'll get a huge bump with Big Ben returning from injury if he can stay healthy. He finished as the number 39 wide receiver last year, and he is currently ranked 52 by Fantasy Pros, another ranking that I think Johnson can easily surpass. They did just use their first pick in the draft on another wide receiver, Chase Claypool, but if Ben stays healthy, I think Johnson could be a steal in this year's fantasy drafts. All right, going to the rookie wide receivers for 2020. There's 17 of them drafted in the first 3 rounds. The top 3 wide receivers in the draft probably won't finish anywhere near the top 3 just because of how much talent they have around them. But let's look at all these guys. So you got Henry Ruggs III with the Raiders. He was the first of 3 wide receivers drafted by the Raiders. The other 2, Lynn Bowden Jr. and Brian Edwards. They go back-to-back in the 3rd round. Edwards was the 5th wide receiver drafted between the Broncos and the Raiders in the first 3 rounds. So the Chargers could have the weakest wide receiver core in the AFC West with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Hunter Henry, which is kind of hard to believe, but there is some serious talent heading on over to the AFC West. Next is Jerry Jeudy with Denver. The other Alabama wide receiver also goes to the AFC West. He will play opposite Courtland Sutton. KJ Hamler then gets drafted in the 2nd round, making Denver an instant nightmare to cover when you add in Noah Fant and Melvin Gordon coming out of the backfield. I love Jeudy, but I don't see how all these guys are going to be consistent fantasy options. The next is CeeDee Lamb with Dallas. He goes to Dallas to play with Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. The Cowboys did throw the ball a hell of a lot last year. Dak had the 6th most attempts in the league. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the Cowboys use these 3 guys because they can all kind of move inside or outside. So I don't know if we're really going to have defined roles on this team. I think you're going to be seeing these 3 guys just moving around all game long. Next, staying in the NFC East, you got Jalen Reagor. Reagor, to me, is the guy who's in the best position to have a big year. The Eagles have been so incredibly desperate for a young wide receiver to play well. Reagor will be a solid number 3 to go with Deshaun and Alshon Jeffrey. And if and when one of these guys do get hurt, Reagor could be a monster. The Eagles' base offense with Sanders, Ertz, Goddard, Jackson, and Reagor could be pretty damn explosive if everyone can stay healthy. Next for me is Justin Jefferson, who I think could also have a good rookie year. He steps into Stephon Diggs' place. I think Diggs' trade and this draft pick also solidifies Adam Thielen as the top dog in the Vikings passing game, but they used Diggs out wide, running deep, short options. They used him all over the field, and I think Jefferson's going to be doing a lot of the same. He showed himself to be very versatile in college. The Vikings will be a run-first offense no matter what under Mike Zimmer, but I took a look at Diggs' rookie season, which was his lowest fantasy year. 52 catches on 84 targets for 720 yards and 4 touchdowns. That was in 2016, and Diggs finished as number 38 wide receiver. Last year, Diggs got 94 targets, which I don't think Jefferson will see, but I think he can easily get to that 84 mark that Diggs did in 2016. I think Jefferson can break the top 32 wide receivers by the season end, which should make him a solid flex. Going down, we got next Brandon Ayuk with San Francisco. Last year, Deebo Samuel's rookie year, he got 81 targets. Although this team also loves to run the ball, Ayuk should easily be the third best option in the pass game for the 49ers. I think he should see the same amount of work as Deebo did last year, and I think we could see him finish right where Deebo finished, which was at number 29, which again puts him as another solid flex play. The next guy is T. Higgins. It might be hard for Higgins to get the amount of work that we want him to, assuming A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, and John Ross all stay healthy. The Bengals used the 11 personnel 74% of their snaps last year, which was the highest percentage of the league. So I don't think we're really going to see all four of these guys on the field at the same time. But A.J. Green is playing on the franchise tag, and the Bengals declined the fifth-year option of John Ross. So Higgins might be a better stash in keeper and dynasty leagues than a redraft pick this year. I think he's going to have a better future than what we see in his rookie season. Next is Michael Pittman with the Colts. Their offense is going to look very different from last year with a legit wide receiver like Pittman and with Phillip Rivers at quarterback. I think the passing game will come off of the play-action game, which should also be improved with Jonathan Taylor running the ball. T.Y. Hilton has been the man there for years, but I would not be surprised if after this season we see the number one role kind of shift more towards Pittman. This offense will also use two tight ends a lot with Jack Doyle and Trey Burton if he can stay healthy. I really like Pittman. He's got the speed and he can get downfield, and he's got the hops to go up and compete for those high point balls. I think he can quietly have one of the better rookie seasons out of these wide receivers. Next is Laviska Shenault with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Shenault has the easiest road to becoming the number one on his team, with Jacksonville's wide receiver core being pretty much DJ Shark, and that's it. Shark and Westbrook both had over 100 targets last year, but Shark getting about 20 more than Westbrook. Shark almost doubled Westbrook in yards per reception and yards per target. Westbrook had an average depth of target of 6.5 yards, which says Westbrook was used on those short area targets, and he only had 5 yards of yak per catch. So he didn't really break too many any of those long runs, which Shenault is great at. He should step in and be an upgrade at that slot receiver role right away for Gardner Minshew. Next is Chase Claypool with Pittsburgh, who I mentioned earlier. The Steelers are great at developing wide receivers. I'm excited to see what they can do with Claypool. He'll have a lot of guys to compete with, including my man, Saheed Blacknell from the XFL. Keep seeing more and more of these XFL guys getting signed after the draft here. James Washington, DeAndre Johnson, and Juju Smith-Schuster all had between 70 and 90 targets last year, so I don't know what kind of percentage we can expect from Claypool, but apparently the Steelers have no intentions of re-signing Juju to an extension. So if he's gone next year, then maybe Claypool is another guy that might be a better keeper dynasty stash for next season. The next guy, Van Jefferson, he will compete for the third wide receiver spot with Josh Reynolds in L.A. The number 3 wide receiver spot for the Rams has been a great spot to be in for a couple years, but we saw this offense use their tight ends more and more towards the end of last season, with Tyler Higbee having a huge second half. He went from 27 targets in his first 8 games to 62 targets in his last 6 games. He may seem like a replacement for Brandon Cooks with a very similar 40-yard dash time, but he's about 3 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier than Brandon Cooks. So the Jefferson route running profile is much better as a slot receiver. I'm staying away from Jefferson unless we come out of training camp and preseason with Jefferson ahead of Reynolds on the depth chart, which I don't foresee happening. And then even then, I'd still be worried that the majority of those short-range targets end up in the middle of the field going to the tight ends. Got a couple more wide receivers here. Denzel Mims with my New York Jets. Last but not least, of the second round rookie wide receivers, Denzel Mims. I'm not going to lie, as a Jets fan, I was kind of hoping for one of those top 3 wide receiver prospects, but the Jets went with the left tackle. Then I was hoping for Michael Pittman in the second round, which quickly was out of the cards. And then the Jets traded back from 48 to 59. I thought there was no way they were going to be able to get a good wide receiver, but luckily Denzel Mims fell to them and the Jets grabbed him. So Mims was very versatile in college. He ran routes from pretty much every wide receiver spot from all over the field. He was drafted to replace Robbie Anderson, but I think in the long run he could be better than Robbie Anderson. He's great at getting off the line of scrimmage, and he was tied for the 5th highest vertical jump at the combine among wide receivers. So, he can go up and get those 50-50 balls. The Jets have not had a legit number 1 wide receiver in a long time, so I'm excited to see what he can become. And then in the third round, real quick, you had 2 guys, Antonio Gibson going to Washington. The Redskins hope to hit on another third-round wide receiver after getting Terry McLaurin last year in the third round. Gibson is much more of a hybrid player, getting the tag as a running back / wide receiver. I think they'll use him in ways that we saw Chris Thompson used over the past few years in Washington. I don't see him getting too many carries, with the Redskins being absolutely loaded at running back, but head coach Ron Rivera has said that they plan on using multiple running backs, so maybe we do see Gibson on the field with one of those other running backs, with Gibson lined up in the slot or something like that. And then the last guy here, Devin Duvernay.
All right.
He was one of 4 players in college football with 100-plus catches last year. James Prochet, the second wide receiver drafted by the Ravens, was one of the other 3 guys with 100-plus catches. Duvernay gives Baltimore another speed guy to place with Marquise Brown. I wouldn't be surprised if Duvernay ends up leading the Ravens in wide receiver targets at the end of the year. He caught almost everything thrown to him at Texas, and he's a physical wide receiver, somebody that the Ravens really like. I think he fits absolutely perfectly in Baltimore. All right, let's move on to the running backs. Let's see if I can do this in 10 minutes. 11 running backs from 2019 are worth mentioning, starting with the starters. You got Josh Jacobs with the Raiders. He might be in the best position of all the second-year running backs. With all the additions that the Raiders made on offense, Jacobs will probably never see any more than 7 guys in the box. And although Gruden loves the whole West Coast offense with the 15-word play calls, he still wants to pound that rock. So I think Josh Jacobs is going to get plenty of touches. The next guy who may be in a better position, but we'll end up seeing that, is Miles Sanders. Finished as the number 15 running back in half PPR last year, thanks in big part to what he did in the passing game. He was 7th in the league in receiving yards among running backs, despite having the 12th most targets. He is the clear-cut number 1 running back, and he should dominate the Eagles' backfield in touches. Fantasy Pros has him ranked right now as the number 13 running back going into the 2020 season, behind Aaron Jones at 12. And if the kid from Boston College takes enough work from Aaron Jones, then I think we could see Miles Sanders break into that top 12. Next is Devin Singletary. He might be one of the most affected by the draft, with the Bills taking the 5'10", 225-pound Zach Moss. I think the goal line work will go to Moss, and maybe even some third down snaps, with Moss averaging 13.9 yards per reception in his senior year at Utah. Frank Gore had 166 carries last year, 15 more than Singletary. I think Moss could take the same amount of touches this year, so Singletary's touches shouldn't go down all that much, but they just won't be going in the way of, Miles Sanders getting 80% of the touches and Moss only getting 20. I think it's going to be more of a split between these guys. Next, David Montgomery. I was kind of surprised that Montgomery finished as the number 25 running back with his 7.5 yards per receptions and 9 games with under 15 carries. He definitely got lucky with his 7 touchdowns, tied with Josh Jacobs for the most among rookie running backs. The two were also tied for most carries among the rookie class with 242. He is one of the running backs that has much better value in non-PPR leagues than in PPR leagues, with Tariq Cohen there, who was second on the team in targets with 104. Only Le'Veon Bell averaged fewer yards per carry than David Montgomery among the running backs, with over 200 carries last year. Next is the handcuffs, the rookies from last year that are essentially handcuffs this year. You got Alexander Mattison. I think Mattison could have the most value from this group if his running mate were to get hurt. The Vikings are one of the most run-heavy teams in the league, and Dalvin Cook has missed 19 games in the last 3 years. Next is Tony Pollard with the Cowboys. Like Mattison, his value is obviously very much tied to Ezekiel Elliott's health. Zeke started every game last year, but Pollard was still pretty productive. He had 4 games with double-digit touches and had over 100 rushing yards and a touchdown in 2 of those 4 games. He averaged over 5.5 yards per touch. He's a solid handcuff, and he should definitely be drafted if you draft Ezekiel Elliott. Next is Benny Snell. He started 2 games in place of James Conner last year, and he finished with over 90 rushing yards in both of those games. He had another 3 games with 16 or more carries. He had the most carries in this group of 5 handcuffs, but only 4 targets on the season. Jalen Samuels was 4th on the team in targets as the 3rd running back, which really hurts Snell's standalone value, keeping him kind of locked into nothing more than a handcuff to James Conner. Next is Darrell Henderson. He has had a pretty up and down 2020 offseason, starting with the Rams cutting Todd Gurley after failing to trade him, and then the Rams used their first pick to take Cam Akers at 52 overall. Henderson ended up with only 39 carries last year, about 30 less than Malcolm Brown. With Gurley gone, that's 220 carries from last year that got to go somewhere. I think Brown, Henderson, and Akers will all kind of split touches in the beginning of the season. But if I had to put my money on one of them, I'm going to take the rookie. From what I can tell from watching his highlights, he's got great vision and patience. And last but not least, among the handcuffs, we got Justice Hill. He's not really a handcuff, but I didn't want to put him in the next category, which is guys that might get cut. So that's why he's here. Hill is definitely the guy most affected by J.K. Dobbins getting drafted in the 2nd round this year. The Ravens running backs had just under 400 carries last year. Ingram had 200, Gus Edwards had about 130, and Justice Hill had about 60. So I think Mark Ingram will still be the top dog in the Ravens backfield at the season's end, but there will definitely be a more even distribution of touches. Unfortunately for Hill, I think he's going to play primarily on special teams. And then the next 2 guys, 2 rookie running backs from last year who I think might actually be cut going into this season is Damian Harris and Darwin Thompson. So I got about 4 minutes left, and we got a bunch of rookie running backs for the 2020 season. I'm going to try and get through all of these now. So starting, obviously, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Andy Reid wants to make him his new Brian Westbrook. Damian Williams will still get plenty of work, but I think Edwards quickly will show himself to be the best back for the Chiefs. Last year, Damian and LaShawn McCoy each had about 35 targets, with Darrell Williams getting another 20 and Darwin Thompson getting 10. I think Edwards-Helaire could easily get 50 targets in his rookie season in this offense. If I can get Edwards as my 2nd running back, especially in PPR, I'll be absolutely thrilled. Fantasy Pros has him ranked right now as the highest projected rookie running back this year. Next is Cam Akers, so I kind of touched on before. He'll be competing with Malcolm Brown and Darrell Henderson. Akers fits really well with the whole zone rushing scheme that the Rams absolutely dominated the league with 2 years ago. So that's why if I'm going to put my money on any one of these Rams running backs, it's going to be Cam Akers. Next is Jonathan Taylor. He will most likely get the workhorse touches, the quickest out of the, that us fantasy football players covet among running backs. He'll get these touches quickest, I think. He, too, will have to compete for carries with Marlon Mack. Nyheim Hines looks in line to get the majority of the running back targets. So, like Marlon Mack, I think Jonathan Taylor is a much better pick in non-PPR leagues. But I think by week 10, Taylor could be a solid RB2 behind that awesome offensive line in Indianapolis. Next is J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins will benefit playing with Lamar Jackson, as every running back benefits playing with Lamar Jackson, but Dobbins most likely won't get the majority of touches for another year. So Mark Ingram will still be the lead dog, but the number 2 running back spot in Baltimore is almost as good as the number 1 running back spot on some other teams. So if anything happens to Mark Ingram, Dobbins should be an absolute monster, and I think he's as good as any late round RB pick at the end of the draft. Next, DeAndre Swift. Swift will also be competing for touches with Kerryon Johnson mainly, but Bo Scarborough will get a few here and there as well. I think Swift will prove to be the best running back on the team by the end of the season. And if Kerryon Johnson can't stay healthy like he hasn't been able to in the past 2 years, then Swift should be another big-time rookie. The Lions should see plenty of light boxes with Stafford, Kenny Golladay, and Marvin Jones keeping the safeties back. I think Swift could be a better version of Theo Riddick, who 2 years ago with the Lions had 74 targets while the other 3 running backs on the team had 64. They threw the ball a lot to their running backs. I know it's a different offensive coordinator in Detroit now, but I think Swift could easily get between 50, 60 targets in this offense. Next is Keyshawn Martin, another guy that should be a lot more active in the passing game. A lot has been made of Ronald Jones's pass blocking, and something that stood out for Keyshawn Martin. The problem for Martin is that Dare Ogunbowale did a great job on third downs for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year, and I don't know if Bruce Arians is going to just hand over that job to a rookie. Martin is a tough one because playing with Tom Brady could mean massive upside with those targets, but it could mean 0 playing time if his pass blocking is not up to snub. Next guy, Zach Moss, the replacement for Frank Gore, the guy that will unfortunately keep Devin Singletary from taking that next step to a elite running back. I think Moss is good enough to take just enough work from Singletary, but probably won't get enough touches for him to be anything more than just a simple handcuff. A.J. Dillon with the Green Bay Packers. The comparisons to Derrick Henry are real, and so is the hype for this dude to be the next big workhorse along Jonathan Taylor. Aaron Jones will be a free agent after next season, so all signs point to Dillon being the next big-time Packer running back. I don't know if he gets enough touches this season, so I think Dillon is a better stash and dynasty pick, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that backfield. And then a couple honorable mentions. You got Darrington Evans with Tennessee. He'll spell Derrick Henry this season and is a great complement with his speed and smaller size. I doubt he gets anywhere near enough work to be in the starting consideration, but he's worth mentioning is the Titans really do try to tone back Derrick Henry's carries throughout the season to try and keep him healthy. Then Evans should see a decent amount of touches. And last but not least, we got DJ Dallas with the Seattle Seahawks. With Chris Carson dealing with a hip injury that knocked him out late last year, and Rashad Penny returning from an ACL tear last year, DJ Dallas, who some say is the best pass-blocking running back in this class, could seriously be in line for a good 8 to 10 touches a game at least to start the season. I think if you're going to draft Penny, you should go out and get this dude at the end of your draft and potentially get a couple weeks of flex starts out of him until Penny returns. If he ends up going on the PUP list, he won't be able to return until I think week 6 or 8. I know Russell Wilson has talked about throwing the ball more, but this is still Seattle, and they want to establish the run. They are a team that absolutely loves running the ball down your throat. So that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast, the rookies of 2019 and 2020. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you check us next week. I think we're going to be looking over all the coaching changes from last year, this year. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin' or Stickin' is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin' or Stickin' is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.